You should be grateful. You've probably heard those words before. It's something that girls are taught from a very young age, which is to be grateful. And I do see this word being bandied about quite a lot on social media. And it always makes me think about the invisible contracts of female gratitude specifically, because girls are taught very early on in life that we must be grateful for what we are given, and we must show gratitude in very specific ways in order to be deemed to be good girls. And then, of course, as you grow into adulthood, good women. And so we get rewarded quite often in various ways for showing enough gratitude. Now, the word itself can be quite a evocative word, because one of the things I see, particularly in the context of relationships, so dating, relationships and marriage, where gratitude is discussed, you'll see people on one side saying this is bare minimum behavior, people on another side saying, yes, but you should still be grateful. And I think one of the things that we don't realize, and this is why we have to identify the invisible contracts that are often governing our lives and decisions as women, is that one person might feel grateful for something for very specific reasons that go back usually into childhood and what they are used to. I'll never forget, I obviously used to have a lot of friends in my old religion who were dating. They were courting rather, because you don't date in that religion. So they were courting with a view to marriage. And you know, depending on how long they had waited to court for, whether this was their first experience of courtship, and, you know, along the way, there may be certain things that the brother they were courting might do, or they would confide in me and say, you know, this happened. And I would always say to them, you can be gracious, you don't have to be grateful. And I think this is really important. And the reason why I would say that to those particular women is because they hadn't had great experiences up until that point. And sometimes when you are starting from a deficit, let's say you're at -10 and somebody behaves in certain ways you're not used to, or it's the first time, and that brings you up to a -7, you can be grateful, not realizing it's still a deficit. And because there's this attitude baked into girls from childhood that you must be grateful for anything that comes your way, even though some of the things, particularly when you are a child, you rightly deserve and are owed, such as safety, protection, consideration, comfort, care. These are things that all children intrinsically deserve. They aren't actually things that one should have to overwork as a child to reciprocate. Now, let me talk about this before we get stuck in. I'm not talking about manners and etiquette and saying please and thank you here. Yeah, because often when we are referring to children and even adults, we will say they didn't even say thank you. And we are referring to manners and etiquette and expressions, I suppose, of gratitude. What I'm really talking about is when somebody tries to make you feel as if you owe them something, you're now in debt. And there are a lot of women who feel that way because it started in childhood. You know, was it earlier this year? I think it was earlier this year. There was a particular well-known comedian. I believe he's a comedian. He was on a well-known podcast and he was talking about the lack of relationship essentially that he has with one of his daughters. And he was saying that at one point he felt as if she only viewed him as an ATM machine. Now, bear in mind, he had not been a consistent parental presence in her life up until that point. And she was a child. This is a child, no older than 11 years old. So a child. And he was saying she should be grateful. And it's very fascinating to see the online discourse that ensued after that video. And it reminded me of this invisible contract of gratitude, specifically female gratitude. Okay, another example that came up around the same time when I was talking about this over on TikTok is there was a woman who was a wife and she had a toddler and she'd gone to the grocery store and she was finding it difficult to manage the toddler and do the full shop, and she'd been at home all day with the child. And she said that her husband had met her at the grocery store and that she was very grateful that he had done that. Now, in the comments, of course, mixed comments as usual, there were women saying, well, it's his child as well. You're also shopping for the household. And so him coming to, you know, accompany you to occupy the toddler is not something you have to be overly grateful for. Now, her response, and I do believe she did a follow-up video, and she talked about the fact that she was grateful and there's nothing wrong with showing gratitude. And here's the thing that also got me, is that in the comments, there were men saying this is the kind of woman that men will do things for because she's grateful. Now, I recognize that the word itself can mean different things to different people, but that's why I'm drawing that distinction around the fact that I'm not talking about expressions of gratitude or manners, which you could be training your child to demonstrate and understand the value of. And then when we're adults, when somebody is kind, if there's an act of kindness, an act of care, you will say thank you. You will recognize that that person doesn't have to do these things for you, particularly when you're two adults and your peers. When you're two adults and your peers, they don't have to do anything. However, children deserve and are owed it. And so this attitude we have, often a lot of parents have, you chose to have those children. Children are children. They are often defenseless, helpless. They are reliant on the adults, in fact, the primary caregiver parents, to protect them, care for them, keep them safe and keep them comfortable. And when you build this attitude into children in general, much less young girls, that they must be grateful for what is owed to them, that carries on into adulthood. Now, when it comes to two adults, in my opinion, particularly when you have said vows to someone, you know, lots of people say vows, especially if they're religious. So these are not only legal vows, they are religious vows, supposedly that reflect your character as a human being. And then you say you should be grateful when you are merely treating that person with the respect, care, and consideration that they are now owed within the context of that container, which is marriage. It is very important, okay? It's very important to understand this invisible contract around gratitude, because what you can find is you are in situations as an adult woman where actually you are feeling indebted. And actually you start to tolerate things that you don't have to be tolerating, or, okay, you are overly thankful when indeed sometimes this person is doing the bare minimum. They genuinely are doing the bare minimum, but in the process they want you to feel indebted. They want you also to accept this bare minimum when actually they're not fully even operating at the level that you should both be treating each other at. Now, I should never have to say this, but I'm going to say it. A lot of the behaviors that we really would like people to be exhibiting towards one another as a sign of respect and love and etc., they are genderless, okay? In nowhere am I suggesting that a woman should not be demonstrating these kind of traits and characteristics and qualities towards a man that she says she respects and loves. I'm not saying that. But we are going to talk about female gratitude, the invisible contract around female gratitude, very specifically today. And if you want to look at these kinds of invisible contracts in more detail, head to somewhere in the link or the description. There's a completely free Invisible Contract Foundations framework download. This allows you to personally and privately reflect on invisible contracts that might be governing your life. It goes through in detail what invisible contracts are and how they show up in the different domains of life. So here's the thing. I'm not talking about gratitude in the ordinary sense of appreciating something generous or unexpected, okay? But I'm talking about gratitude as the position you are expected to occupy just because you're a woman. A lot of the time this is linked to that as well. And that's why I found that comment from that man in the comments very interesting. And I wrote about it on Substack at the time. Why should a woman have to be grateful in order for the man that she's had a child with, birthed a child with, where she's buying food for the household, not for herself, for everybody. Why should she feel grateful beyond expressing appreciation, like, thank goodness you're here, great to see you, thank you for coming along, and what? Co-parenting. He is not doing her a favor. Now, part of the problem we have, of course, is the fact that because standard of behavior is so low, there are people who either don't care, cannot, will not show up in these ways in family settings. And it doesn't even have to be male-female relationship here. Mother, daughter, siblings, whatever, okay? Because the standard is so low, and a lot of women, or some women rather, are not used to anything. You may have grown up in a family where there was no care and consideration. And so when you meet somebody in your adult life who does one or two things that have never been done for you before, you suddenly think, I'm indebted to this person. This is a position that I must occupy of gratefulness. No. Yeah? And so what the message that a lot of women are sent, especially actually, the further away, quite frankly, you are from the beauty standard, the further away you are from the supposed, pinnacle of womanhood, the more grateful you're meant to be, by the way. If you're fat, if you're old, if you're disabled, if you are sometimes even a black woman, you must be grateful. If your hair is natural, if you are a poor woman, you must be even more grateful that somebody chose you, somebody noticed you, that somebody gave you an opportunity, that a man is providing. I mean, and you know how I feel about this male provider nonsense, okay? But I mention that because that is often a part of this conversation when people are discussing these kinds of things. You must be grateful that an employer gave you a chance. Grateful that someone has helped you. Grateful for what you have, so don't ask for more. Grateful because other women have less. Grateful because women before you couldn't do this, so make do. I'll never forget listening in on conversations that were being had by women who were not with the fathers of their children. And one of them in particular was talking about the fact that the father of her child barely gives any money. It's very ad hoc, and when it is, he's, scrimping and scriming to give her as little as possible. And there was another woman in the room as I was listening on as a young woman who said, well, you should be grateful. Bearing in mind, these people were married in the past. These are two children that belong to that man. They are his DNA. And the woman who was saying you should be grateful, it was because she didn't get any money from the father of her child. Do you see? Often it's about where you're starting from, is what is influencing your gratitude for this other person. And one thing about me is I've always known there are certain things that are about basic human dignity, and they are deserved. And whether or not I ever experienced them growing up or I haven't experienced them before, that doesn't mean I need to occupy this position of constant gratitude because I'm a woman. No. No. Now, might I be gracious? Yes. Can I express thanks? Yes, it is courteous, it is polite. If when done genuinely, it is a beautiful thing. And when you do it genuinely, that will obviously contribute to people feeling appreciated in the relationship, in the friendship, in the family relationship. However, you cannot constantly occupy this position of gratitude or being grateful as if you don't deserve it anyway. And whilst we're on this topic around deserving, because I know a lot of people really struggle with this kind of stuff. Okay, about, a lot of this is based in the self-worth issue about whether you feel you deserve to be treated with respect, whether you feel that a person who has made a vow to you, okay, not by force, is going to keep that vow. Because the standards are so low, this is why you hear women will say, well, he didn't kick me, he only shoved me. I'm grateful for that. Another woman will say, well, do you know what? He cheated on me, but I didn't know about it, so I'm grateful. These are basic reflections of basic character here. You do not need to be grateful for them. Might you notice it? Yes. Might you look on and say, do you know what? I'm relieved. Maybe you're relieved. That's natural. You're relieved that you're not disappointed, that it's not your experience. Cool, I can see that. But you have to be careful as a woman. And one of the reasons why we must be careful is because this bleeds into our other experiences around money, around health, around abundance and pleasure and rest. Because if you always feel that you are indebted and owing the person who is treating you with respect, for example, it is very difficult for you to feel good enough or deserving for more. That's very difficult. And this is one of the reasons why I find it really interesting when I see these conversations where women are saying, you know, he wasn't abusing me, but I wanted out of the relationship, out of the marriage. And men are saying, well, you can't make women happy. The point is you can want more. You do not have to be grateful and only stay at this level. And maybe it means that you and that person are not compatible. Because if that's the level at which they want to stay and keep treating you, and that doesn't align for you and with you, it is what it is. Okay, so it's very important to understand that it bleeds into other areas where you may want more legitimately. You may give yourself the right to want more than what you have. And we see this really come through when it comes to money as well. So quality of relationships and money, but also quality of life, standard of living. And a lot of the time we live in a society that tells women, again, the further away you are from the beauty standard, the further away you are from what society has decided, the further away you are from who, society has decided deserves these things. You see, this is really interesting as well, because when I look on, a lot of the time, you know, you'll see kind of a woman come online who doesn't meet the beauty standard. Maybe she has had children in a previous marriage. Maybe she is, you know, not slim or whatever. And she talks about the things that her husband does for her. Oh, look in the comments. Because people don't think she deserves it. They don't think she deserves it. And because they don't think she deserves it, what should she be? She should be grateful. She should be grateful for anything less. In fact, everything less than that. And so when you as a woman move through and you break this invisible contract, specifically around female gratitude, there will be people who say you're getting too big for your boots. You think too much of yourself. You think you're nice. You're showing off. You don't deserve that. I'll never forget when I was growing up. Obviously, I grew up in a religion where marriage was the standard, right? And when I was growing up, being in a single parent family was not the norm. That was not the norm. And I know things have shifted these days. There's all sorts of different family formats, and being a single mother is not, you know, new or radical or anything. But back then there was stigma. You're talking over 30 years ago. And I was having a conversation with a couple of families at a gathering, and they were talking about with their own daughters, you know, what the expectations were of their daughters, particularly in relation to a young brother who may want to court the daughter. And one of the fathers was saying, you know, that he would expect the young man to do X, Y, Z and approach him and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, yeah, I mean, that makes total sense. You know, that's what I would want for my sister, because for me, I've never wanted to be a man's wife. So, you know. And he was like, well, why? And I said, well, why not? If it's good enough for your daughter, why isn't it good enough for my sister? And the room was silent. I said, no, but you just outlined why your daughter, in your estimation, deserves that kind of treatment. What's the difference? If it's good enough for you, why wouldn't it be good enough for mine? And the room was silent. Then it was like, oh, no, I didn't mean that. Well, that is actually what you meant. You think that we are of less value, and therefore we don't deserve that same kind of diligence and respect to be shown to my sister. It's not really about me. Okay, this is what I mean. It's about often where you might be coming from, where you're starting from, or where people think you're coming from. Because I can tell you the number of times people have actually said to me, I actually thought you were married, just from my countenance and disposition. And isn't that bizarre? There's nothing about me that says wife, in my opinion, but I understand in certain contexts why they might think that. And then when they're like, oh, I mean, it would happen a lot in that religion. It's like, oh, it's only your mum. Because there's a whole thing about spiritual heritage. But my point here is this. Often when people think you're not coming from anything, you don't know any better, You don't deserve more, and therefore you should be grateful for what you are being given now. It's one of the reasons why I always say you must be rooted and regulated and resourced. Why do I say that? In part, because there's many reasons why this needs to be the standard for us. But in part is when you're rooted, you know who you are. You have a sense of self. So nobody else can come along and buy you things, do things for you, where for you, it is filling a deep, gaping void. No, you get to recognize that this is surplus. You get to recognize that you do deserve to be treated with respect anyway. And when you are of decent character, you will express thanks. And as I say, if it's a relationship, you should be reciprocating this kind of treatment. My point here is that when you're rooted, you know who you are. You've got a good sense of self. It makes a massive difference to how you perceive the way you're being treated. When you're regulated, because when we're often in survival mode, crisis mode, chaos mode, it's like water in a desert. When somebody comes along and does something very basic. Again, I'm not talking about when your friends come and help you out or something big like grief, or I'm not talking about those contexts. But I do know it is very dangerous often when it comes to, interactions with men, and you are always in chaos and crisis. You will think, I must be grateful. You will be told you should be grateful. Look where you were at when I met you. Why do you think that some misogynistic men have this fantasy about picking a woman up who works in McDonald's? She was barefoot on the street when I met her, and I provided for her. So that's why she should be grateful. And this, as I say, it starts in childhood. That is why you have men who are fathers who believe that their daughters should be grateful when they are doing the bare minimum. They are loving, caring, and considering that child as children deserve. There is no debt in return. And it's actually just very strange to me that men are expecting their daughters who are children to be emotionally regulated and behave in ways that they themselves can't even behave as an adult man. But anyway, it's very important here to understand respect is not a gift. Fair compensation for your work is not a gift. A partner parenting their own child. I'll never understand why men will say, oh, when she had a child, I felt completely left out. I felt like I wasn't even there. So hold on a minute. Are you not a parent? Why do you have all this free time? Are you not a parent? Why is your parenting even contingent upon her? Where's all this free time? Like somebody parenting their own DNA. It's not a gift to you as a woman. It's really not even a gift to the child, but depending on where you're coming from, maybe you're not used to that. That isn't a standard for you, so you feel like actually this is an achievement. I chose a man who is still present and who is choosing to father his child. Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay? Receiving your share of something you helped create is not a gift. Being treated with basic human dignity is not a gift. That's why I really do draw the distinction between gratitude and graciousness and grace. Because you can receive something graciously without positioning yourself beneath the person who is giving it to you. You can say thank you. You can acknowledge that person's contribution. You can be warm. You can be generous. Genuinely sincere. You can appreciate what they've actually done, but none of that requires you to be in debt and owe that person, and worse still, accept any old treatment as a result. No. Right? When you are operating from a place of grace in this context, you can receive fully without making yourself smaller in response. Yes? So being grateful, gratitude can describe how you feel, but it's not a position from which you operate. Okay? Now, here's the other thing as well. when you are in a situation right now where you want more, whether it's more money through a salary, whether it's, you know, you want a better quality relationship, what will happen is, because you're constantly being told to be grateful, you start to settle. You start to expect less and live with less. And your system is incredibly smart. So it will adjust, quite frankly, to the level that you set. That's what happens. Okay? And so you start to lower your expectations. You stay longer than you otherwise would. You start to negotiate. You start to barter. You maybe stop speaking up for what you want because you don't want to seem like you're being miserable, that you're complaining, that you are ungrateful. Yes? And the thing is that nobody's going to necessarily, it's something that you'll start to self-adjust and do. Because why? Good girls are grateful. Good girls are quiet. Good girls accept what they're given. That's why I love that quote that says, the good girl doesn't get the corner office. Yeah? If you are just grateful for what you currently have, you will not have more. Yeah, and I know there's a lot of kind of journal affirmations and practices around gratitude. Again, I'm not talking about being genuinely mindful and aware of what you have. I'm talking about in relation to other people and our relationships with other people, our relationship with money specifically. I'm sorry to say, women who ask questions, women who ask for more, women who understand that more is available to them, they get what they want. And that is in the midst of being labeled as difficult, spoiled, selfish, greedy, ungrateful, arrogant, pompous, conceited, thinking too much. I can't tell you the number of times me, sometimes it's either as a black woman, when I was a fat black woman, a girl that came from a single parent home in London, Southeast London, who people did not rate or rank. And I can tell you that for nothing. Inside my religion, when we were growing up, we were not rated and respected at all. There was a stigma. We were treated according to that. Let me tell you, there are plenty of times where people thought, who do you think you are? They literally would tell me that. Who do you think you are? When I said, I'm going to have this house, I'm going to have this kind of car, I'm going to move to New York, the amount of people said, you can't do that. Yes, I can. When I wanted to shift before I went independent and I was working my way up, how could you apply for that job? Because I want to. I had a vision. I knew who I was, and I knew for damn sure that I didn't have to be grateful for being given very little by certain people who, quite frankly, in my childhood, owed me care, owed me consideration. I understood from a very young age I did not need to be grateful for being given nothing or less or little. And I knew that I could ask for more, I could want more, I could have more. And to this day, I feel that way. To this day, when I look at my younger siblings, when I look at my younger cousins and nieces, I say, yes, you deserve more. You can have more. You can have more. And just because you're a girl, it doesn't mean that you must accept less. And we do girls a disservice from a very young age when we're constantly telling them to be grateful, quite frankly, for things that they deserve. Especially when they are a child. And so eventually what happens is that gratitude becomes a mechanism of social control, of keeping you in your place. And don't even get me started when I hear a man say you should know your place. What place is that? And I know not everybody's religious, but what I will say as we wrap this video up is one thing I know to be true, especially when I think about the fact that I do still believe that a God exists. My response is always, I'm in the place that God has put me. I'm in that place. And if you treat me in any other way than the place that God has put me as a human being, and when I say this, I'm talking about basic human dignity and respect. I'm not saying I need anyone to treat me like a queen. I'm saying I'm a human being with intrinsic human value. And quite frankly, we are peers. Just because you're a man and I'm a woman, that does not mean that you are superior to me. We are peers in terms of intrinsic human value. So I do expect to be respected. The place I should be in is in a place of respect. And on top of that, I conduct myself in certain ways that warrant respect. I don't let people tell me where my place is. And when you are moving from a place of I must be grateful, it's a non-starter. This is why I say you need to be rooted, regulated, and resourced. When you have your own, when you know who you are, somebody else can't come along and just drop off any kind of behavior and conduct. And that actually makes a difference to the way you see yourself, the way you hold yourself, and what you think you are worth, because you already have that and it is unaffected. What they do doesn't affect your internal sense of self. And often this is the work that we have to do as women when it comes to these invisible contracts around female gratitude specifically.